A people pleaser will be like a giver, 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 because what they're doing is they're saying, like me, accept me, and I will keep entertaining you. Whereas the narcissist is a taker. So they are look for acceptance, but in another way. They're like, I'm entitled to it. This is mine to take. So here you have a giver and you have a taker, and they form the perfect trauma bond. And the reason why so many people stay in narcissistic relationships, especially the codependent, people pleasing person, is because it feeds them and it destroys them while it's feeding them at the same time. So it's a double-edged sword, and they don't see it. So you will only ever see it, if you want to, by the way, when
Mm,
you're in a pretty bad way
yeah.
of burnout. Because what happens with people pleasers is they have little to no boundaries. And of course, if you have no boundaries or few boundaries, people are going to be crashing into your space and taking your energy
Mm,
repeatedly. All of our pain is sent specifically for us. All
mm.
of our problems, our woundedness is for us. It's our journey. And they will poke and poke and poke at us until we start to pay attention to them. And if we don't, they will take us out. And taking us out can look like illness
Mhm.
because you are not looking after yourself. The most profound quote I've ever heard or description, it's not mine, I wish it was, of being in a narcissistic relationship. It is best seen in the rear view mirror and not in the windscreen. So, in other words, we don't know when we're in it. We only know after we're out of it. And we reflect back on it and go, wow, that destroyed me.
Narcissism is a hot topic, but what does it really mean? Today, we're breaking it down: how to spot it, navigate it, and break free from toxic relationships, whether that's with partners, family, or colleagues. Joining me today is Michele Paradise, a trauma informed therapist with over 20 years of experience in narcissistic abuse recovery. Trained by experts like Dr. Gabor Maté, she helps people heal using compassionate inquiry, internal family systems, and NLP. As a survivor herself, she brings both expertise and personal insight. But before we get dive in, I have a quick 60-second favor to ask, and that's to subscribe to this podcast and sign up for the 51% community on our website. It's free and helps us bring in even more incredible guests and host impactful events. And I can't wait to see you at our events. And finally, a quick but important note: the views shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. They don't replace professional, medical, or financial advice, so always consult a qualified expert for personalized guidance. Michele, thank you for joining me today. It's fantastic to have you on. I can't wait to have this conversation because I feel like it's a hot topic on, lots of people are talking about narcissism. I hear it a lot on, especially on social media. So really, I want to talk about this with you now because I want to kind of demystify some myths and also get straight to the point on what actually narcissism is. But before we do that, please could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your journey from where you were to what you're doing now? That would be great. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, thank you for inviting me on. I'm always delighted to be on a podcast and with you especially, and talk about one of my favorite subjects. I've had a very interesting route to where I am now, I would say. Not the classic route by any means. I'm American, as you might be able to notice from my transatlantic accent. And I grew up on the East Coast of the United States. And I wanted to be an actress, actually. I always wanted to be there, have an audience. Let's put it that way. So I wanted to be an actress and comedian. That was my other dream. And then I thought about becoming an anchor woman on a news program because I that was really something that attracted me as well. However, I didn't have the right look at the time. I didn't have blonde hair, blue eyes, and other attributes. So that didn't work. And I am very tall, so people kept saying, "Oh, you should be a model. You should be a model." And so, long story short, I was discovered by two European designers whilst I was living in America and brought to London by Zandra Rhodes and Paris by Terry Mugler. And actually, I was too tall to be a model in the 80s, in the early 80s. It was like 5'9" was the cutoff, and I'm 5'11". So that was quite amusing. But I persevered, and I ended up having a 20-year career as a catwalk model and commercials and things like that, not so much print. And I then had a really difficult divorce, very difficult marriage and divorce because and I'll tell you a little bit about the divorce because it will relate to narcissism. I was
Mm.
married for 16 years, and my husband, unbeknownst to me, which is the hardest part to say out loud, had three affairs. And each affair ended with the birth of a child, unbeknownst to me. And the last one was my best friend. So it was really difficult because we had two children, and now they had three siblings. And that was probably the hardest part of it. And the best friend didn't help either. So I went to see somebody on Harley Street and I worked with them because I had some phobias and fears and things that seemed to have come up from the difficult divorce. And he was doing NLP and hypnosis, and I was fascinated by it. So he put me onto neurolinguistic programming, and that started that journey, which I did all my training. I started in the early 2000s. So I've been doing this for 20 years. Let's put it that way. I trained up to becoming a trainer, and then I assisted Dr. Richard Bandler for 10 years, training thousands of people in neurolinguistic programming. During that time, I realized how important hypnosis was to the process because it includes it. So I studied to be a clinical hypnotherapist. And along the way, I was introduced to havening techniques, which is a psychosensory therapy. And what's so wonderful about my experience as I see it is I've been able to train with all the people that created these methodologies. So I not so much hypnosis, but I trained with the doctor that created havening techniques, which is a psychosensory therapy similar to EMDR, but you don't have to take the client back into the trauma every session. In fact, it can be content free, so I actually prefer it. It's a stroking,
Hmm.
and I have a video on YouTube, which I'm happy to share with your listeners in the text. Um, and then I met Dr. Gabor Maté, who I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know, a trauma expert, and Dr. Richard Schwartz. And so Gabor Mate's methodology is called compassionate inquiry. And I've been training with him for 5 years, coming up to 6 years. And Dr. Richard Schwartz is called internal family systems, which very briefly is about, in the old days, we used to bring all the family into the room and give everybody a chance to speak in therapy. But what he realized is that, and I'm really simplifying this, is that we have all of those parts inside of us from our ancestors. And he works with parts of inner child work. So both Gabor Mate and Richard Schwartz do inner child work. And compassion inquiry is about inquiring into self compassionately, because we're usually quite harsh with ourselves. So um, I'm now a bit of an alchemist. I'm client led. I don't come in with an agenda. I let the client lead me to where they need to go because, you can have an agenda. You can see somebody weekly and have an agenda for the next week, but life gets in the way and some things come up. So I find it best to just mix my methodologies with whatever the client needs. Sometimes it might be hypnosis, it might be havening hypnosis, it might be compassion and inquiry, et cetera, et cetera.
That's fantastic. I mean, what a journey you've had. I just wanted to know for my audience, really, what exactly is narcissism? That's the starting point, really.
Okay. Well, you're going to hear there's a lot of TikTok therapists out there, as I call them. You're going to hear a lot of different versions of it. Um, but as I understand it from the experts, and also using the methodology of compassion and inquiry with Dr. Gabor Mate, it is a trauma response. So as much as people would like to believe that narcissist, so let me just qualify this first. NPD is narcissistic personality disorder. It is the highest end of the spectrum. It is, very serious. So to give you an example, if you went to death row, let's say in America, and you did an assessment of people on death row, let's say you chose men, because this has actually been done. So I will relate, I will refer to that. Most of them will be malignant narcissist, which is the highest, meaning that they are dangerous. They can kill, they can really hurt people, even if it's emotionally, which is, I'm not minimizing that, but even if it's not physical harm, it will be serious, serious emotional harm, mental harm, psychological harm. So that is at the very highest end of the spectrum. That requires a psychiatrist to do the assessment, not a therapist. Okay. So what for today, for the purposes of this podcast, I'm going to be speaking about something called narcissistic personality style. Because the problem with NPD is that rarely will a narcissist walk into a psychiatrist's office and say, hey, doc, assess me. They won't do it. So we don't know the statistics. I'm going to quote you some statistics, but okay. So what they allegedly 1 to 2% of the population are NPD. But how do we know that really? Because, there's probably a lot more walking around that don't, because one of their biggest markers is that they are delusional and they don't see themselves as narcissistic. They see themselves as, incredibly amazing, wonderful people. And if you look, I won't name any names, but if you look around the world, we have many, many leaders of countries that are malignant narcissists, or certainly high on the narcissistic spectrum, because they're very delusional and entitled and grandiose. And those are some adjectives used in that space. But let me just then come back to center. So I'm going to be talking about narcissistic personality style, and that's about 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 of the population present with that. However, this is a very difficult, as I think you're beginning to realize, very difficult to gauge any of this, okay? Because it's based on an opinion, really. So what is narcissism? Where does it come from? It is a personality adaptation to survive. And I'm going to use myself. I never use my clients when I speak because they can identify themselves sometimes. It's funny that. And if if they do, I can lose my license. So I never do that. So I will use myself, not that I want to talk about myself, but my personality adaptation, my overriding one was people pleasing, codependency. Now, that is just part of me. That doesn't define me. So I will have attracted, and I did, narcissistic type people, because people pleasers are, and this isn't to make me feel better, because trust me, it is also manipulative to be a people pleaser and codependent. It's as manipulative as being a narcissist. But it's just a different type of manipulation. So just very simplistically, a people pleaser will be like a giver, because what they're doing is they're saying, like me, accept me, and I will keep entertaining you as long as you need to like me, to give back to me a reflection of myself, to say, yeah, be my friend. Okay. Very simplistically. Whereas the narcissist is a taker. So they are looking, and I'll explain why in a moment, they're looking for acceptance, but in another way. They're like, I'm entitled to it. This is mine to take. And so here you have a giver and you have a taker, and they form the perfect trauma bond and the perfect codependency, because the people pleaser will be an endless supply to them, because supply is a really important word in narcissism. They're looking for supply. And I have a diagram I'll show you in a moment. And the people pleaser is looking for acceptance, to fix, to look after, that kind of thing, to nurture. So they're perfect for each other. And the reason why so many people stay in narcissistic relationships, especially the codependent, people pleasing person, is because it feeds them. It just feeds their need, and it destroys them while it's feeding them at the same time. So it's a double-edged sword, and they don't see it. The most profound quote I've ever heard, or description, it's not mine, I wish it was, of being in a narcissistic relationship. It is best seen in the rear view mirror and not in the windscreen. So in other words, we don't know when we're in it. We only know after we're out of it, and we reflect back on it and go, wow, that destroyed me. But when you're in it, you just want to make it better. You want to fix it. Because what happens is, I'm jumping ahead. Let me just finish what I was saying about the trauma bond. So I grew up, a child has three needs to be met: to be seen, to be heard, to be accepted just the way they are. And that is the important bit when they're babies, children. Our biggest fear is rejection and abandonment. Okay. That's for all of us, from the day till the day we die, depending on how securely attached we were as children. The people pleaser and the narcissist, just taking two archetypes, will not have been securely attached in the first 3 years of our lives, because the first 3 years are the most important 3 years. I'm not saying the rest don't matter, but we have research. Bessel van der Kolk talks about this all the time. You get the first 3 years right with your children, and it's kind of easier after that. All right. So what does that look like? It goes back to John Bowlby, the psychologist that did all the work on attachment theory. And ideally, we want our children to be securely attached, so that they feel safe with us for the first 3 years of our lives. And then when they begin to separate and individuate after that 3 years, they know that we're there. We're like an anchor for them. They can look over their shoulder and see that secure attachment, and feel better and more able to take smaller steps out into the world. The child that is not securely attached they're dysregulated. So both of these children are reacting to their environment. And just to give you an idea of how narcissism can develop in a family, excuse me, again, it's like a spectrum. So you'll have a child, both of them will have, both ends of the spectrum will not have had their needs met. But this one on the low end of the spectrum has not had their needs met. They've had a lot of adverse childhood experiences, which reverts back to the ACE test, adverse childhood experiences, where there's 10 questions that help us determine how much small t trauma the child experienced. So they will feel unmet needs, disliked, not loved. So they will possibly choose and when I say choose, it's unwittingly, they do it involuntarily, but they choose it to survive. So they choose to go out into the world. And it looks like this. This is the narc in the middle, and this is their supply wheel, and we're spokes on their supply wheel. And sometimes we drop off because we choose to drop off, or they get rid of us for a while, but then they come back. So the narc on that end of the spectrum is very, very unhappy, very sad, very disenfranchised, angry, frustrated, disappointed, all of that. On the higher end of the spectrum is called the golden child syndrome. So this child was doted on, cotton-wooled perhaps, but it's not as great as it sounds, because they are being formed by the parent in the reflection of the parent. So in other words, I mean, I've literally had a client they didn't become a client, so I can talk about them. I've literally had a father call me up and say, my daughter is at Oxford and she's falling apart. You know, she's melting down and I don't know what to do. And now she has an eating disorder. And I always want to speak to the parent first and find out about their childhood and things. And in this situation, he was like, well, I always wanted to go to Oxford. I didn't get in, things like that. Again, very simplistic explanation. So he was pressuring her. He had pressured her all her life to go to Oxford, to be accepted in Oxford. Wasn't her choice. And that will be the golden child syndrome. That's just one example of what it looks like. So that child is told that they're amazing, wonderful, as long as they please the parent. So they grew up with a very unrealistic expectation of what the world is there for. So in other words, the world is there for them. And they get to take whatever they want. And what happens is there are 3 to 4 stages of narcissism. So the first one is love bombing, which I'm sure we've all heard about. And that's when they really want to get you on their supply wheel, and they will do anything to get you in. And it's very unrealistic. You'll hear things like, I've never met a person like you. Within a week, they might be telling you they can't live without you or how much they love you. This can go on for up to a year. I know some people think, oh, it only lasts. It typically only lasts for a short period of time because it's really takes a lot of energy, but it depends on who you are and what they want from you. Okay. So you become a supply for them. And so they will love bomb you until they reel you in, but it's not real. It's fake. It's a mask that they wear. So once they have you in, and maybe they get bored with you, or you're no longer giving them what they need from you. Maybe your money's run out, or your looks have faded, or you have had a couple children and your attention has gone more to the children than to them. That's a big struggle for a lot of narcissists, to be usurped by children. So they will then go into what is called the devaluation stage. And those are things that a lot of us have heard, that they include gaslighting, flying monkeys, triangulation, minimization. I could go on and on and on. And that can last for years. That can last for months. That can last for years, depending on what the relationship is like. And that's where a lot of codependent people get stuck, because they're like, I want that person back. I want that person. I know he or she's in there, but they're struggling with work. They have family issues. So they keep making excuses for them to, but what they don't realize is that person never existed in the first place. It was all pretense just to reel them in. And then the third phase is called discard. And that's when you leave. That's when they get rid of you. You don't necessarily leave, but they will completely drop you. And that can be betrayal. That can be ghosting you completely. It depends on what your relationship is. So coming back to myself, that's what I went through in my marriage. However, he didn't ever completely discard me because he had other reasons. But the fourth phase, which doesn't always happen, is called hoovering, based on a British vacuum cleaner called a Hoover. So they come back for you. They hoover you back, and they bring you back onto the supply wheel, because maybe they've brought other people on that didn't give them what you give them, and they know that you still will be there for them. So they put you back on. And this really messes with people, because they think, oh, wow, you see, he or she realizes how important I am to them. No, they don't care. I'm sorry to tell you. I use this phrase. I say this phrase, it's not personal. And people get quite upset when I say that, because they're like, but it is personal. And I said, no, you don't understand. Narcissism is not personal because they don't see you as a person. You are a supply. The narc has 4 needs, okay? And they are sex. That's pretty obvious. Service. Service can be almost like a PA. You know, you drive them around, you do their books. Supply. Supply can be things like you have a lot of money, you have social status, things like that. And the fourth one is safety, the 4 S's of what they need. And safety is you're monogamous, the children are tying you down, you'll never leave. You financially rely on me, so you're not going anywhere.
Mm.
That was a long answer to a short question, but I hope it all sort of
Yeah.
makes sense.
Look, I feel like, it's a complicated thing, right? It's not black and white. And from my point of view, from what I see and hear, it seems like it's black and white, but it actually isn't. And this is why I wanted to kind of delve into it and talk about what you've just given a very long explanation, but I think that's what's needed. It's not a case of this is what it is and this is what it isn't. There are
Black
lots
and
of
white.
things. Exactly. It's not black and white. Now, you mentioned that um people pleasers get kind of attracted to narcissists and vice versa. Is that the only kind of personality trait, and correct me if I'm wrong in even saying personality trait, that attracts narcissists, or are there other things or other types of personalities that narcissists are attracted to? Because I can see definitely, yeah, people pleasers. And also, how do people know that they're people pleasing? Like, how do you know that, how do you even identify, yeah, I am a classic people pleaser? I get that people generally want to be people pleasers. But how do you know like you're a serious people pleaser and that's a big part of your personality? Because I feel like if you are heavy on being a people pleaser, you're straight away going to be attracted to narcissists, and or they will find you and you will get sucked in.
Yeah. It's called a target. You're the
Oh,
target. They
yeah.
target you. Some really great questions there. I'm trying to track them. So the first one was, is people pleasing the only personality that the narc finds attractive? Um, no, no, but I would think that the word codependency is probably better placed in this answer. Um,
Mm,
when I do live workshops, funnily enough, I introduce myself as, hi, I'm Michelle, a recovering people pleaser. So I'll get to that answer in a moment about how do we know? When do
yeah.
we know? And by the way, people pleasing is not a terrible thing. It's actually can be a very beautiful thing. People pleasers are great friends to have, They're
Yeah,
reliable
yeah.
and kind usually. However, it is a manipulation, and you're absolutely right. It's called a personality adaptation. The people pleasing, codependency, fixer, life of the party. There's several archetypes.
Yeah.
So, what the thing about this discussion, the word I would use is there's so much nuance to narcissism.
Mm,
But online, a lot of people go, he's a narcissist, she's not a narcissist, or whatever. No,
yeah.
it doesn't work like that. There are, if I may just explain this might help. There are four types of narcissist, okay? There's your classic narcissist. So all of the narcissists I'm going to describe have these traits, but
Mm,
then there's other aspects of them. That's why this is quite there's a lot of depth to understanding narcissism. So there's the classic narcissist. They will be delusional, entitled, grandiose, lacking empathy, lacking self-awareness. Um, the next one will be the covert narcissist. Oh my goodness, this one is so difficult to spot. They will have all of those traits, but they won't be broadcast like that. They will be much more under the radar. They will be sometimes like, poor me, if my family had more money, I would have gone to a better university and I would have a better job. If only the people at my workplace could see how intelligent I am or how kind I am or whatever, they would promote me. It always, see, with narcissists, there's always
mm,
blame. And that's one of the things you'll really notice if you spend any time around somebody that presents as narcissistic. Nothing is their fault. Nothing. So an apology from a narcissist will be like, you'll get one, but it'll be like this. Hey, Shrey, I'm really sorry for the way I spoke to you yesterday, but you have no idea what I'm going through. My life is awful at the moment. So it's always back to self and how, they're always worse than you. So the covert narcissist is in my opinion, one of the most difficult to spot.
Mhm.
The third one is a malignant narcissist. They will be all of the first one, not the second one, and they will be very dangerous. So that's death row, that's politicians, where they can change the whole landscape of a country based on their own needs. Okay. They
Mhm.
don't care how many people die. They don't care what happens to people. They only care about themselves. That one's that's a lot easier to spot. And the fourth one is quite difficult. It's called a communal narcissist. So
Mhm.
they, and I'm not saying across the board, these are broad strokes. They show up a lot of times in charitable organizations. So they will be like, I've just raised £5 million for this charity, and no one knows how hard I work. They will also be like gurus. They'll have lots of followers. Uh, it escapes me at the moment. I think it was Jonestown. You may not remember this decades ago. This guy led all these people to take this drug that killed them, and they all died by
Oh,
suicide, really. But they were following him because he was this guru. That's communal narcissism. And he didn't, by the way, he didn't die. So, it's sort of like the person you'll hear these stories from time to time. You'll hear that this person had this incredible following, maybe they were yoga or whatever, and then there was sexual abuse going on within the organization, things
yeah.
like that. So those are the four types. Some people will make up all kinds of other things like they do with attachment style, but this is based on the research that has been done in the field
Mhm.
by experts, which is what I always follow. So people pleasing, I'll get to the people pleasing answer. It doesn't, you don't have to be a people pleaser, but you will have a strong need to want to fix. So there's an archetype called the fixer. There's people that like projects, like a relationship is a project.
Mm.
And I heard this great quote the other day. You should, in a relationship, you should not be a rehabilitation center for anybody. And it just really puts it in perspective because a lot of people are rehabilitations for their partner,
Mm.
rehabilitation centers for their partner. So they're like, let me do this, let me fix this, let me make this right. Um, and of course, if you have a narc personality style, they're going to say, thank you very much. I'll take it. Please look after me. Have I answered your questions? There was something else in there I think you mentioned.
Yeah, no, I think it was more a case of, personality types that narcissists are attracted to, and how can you kind of identify whether you're, you know,
Oh,
you're like a people pleaser that is on a higher scale than, like I said, let's face it, we all like to, not all of us actually, but a lot of us like to please. We have a certain trait in us that likes to please, but being to that extreme, an extreme people pleaser, it feels like you're going to instantly attract narcissists.
well, the thing is with people pleasing, it's wonderful until it's not. Okay? And again, like most personality adaptations, they're best seen in the rear view mirror. So you probably won't notice until you decide to do some work on yourself.
Mm.
Okay. And you'll probably decide to do some work on yourself because you've crashed into a wall. In other words, there'll be like um, a lot of collateral damage behind you, like
Mm.
friendships that suddenly disappeared, or you're always giving to somebody. I'm not saying they're a narcissist, but nothing's incoming from them.
Mm.
So you're always going that extra mile for somebody. And you'll get to a point. The problem with things like this is we don't notice them until we're almost on our knees.
Yeah.
Okay. They're poking at us for years.
Mm.
Don't look there because we have adapted our personality at a very young age, and it's become quite a default setting. We're on autopilot, and we're not really thinking about, oh, what did that mean? But then you'll hit a critical wall, and it might be a relationship, or you look around at your life and you go, you know what? I am absolutely exhausted. I give, 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 and I don't seem to be getting anything back, and people seem to be
Mm.
taking. Now, we could sit there and blame everybody else, but we are actually the common denominator in that equation. And this is
Mm.
what a very astute one of my therapists said to me along the way. She said, when I was repeatedly dating narcissistic men, she said, who's the common denominator in this situation? And it was me, which means you're the one who needs to do the work and
Yeah.
stop blaming everybody else for burning you out, breaking your heart, or whatever. So you will only ever see it, if you want to, by the way,
Mm.
when you're in a pretty bad way
Yeah.
of burnout. Because what happens with people pleasers is they have little to no boundaries. And of course, if you have no boundaries or few boundaries, people are going to be crashing into your space and taking your energy
Mm.
repeatedly. And because you've learned how to give without expecting much in return, you won't notice that until
Mm.
you're ill. And I mean that. That's what happens. There's a great he's Gabor Mate's mentor. He's called A.H. Almas, and he's written books called The Diamond Approach. And it's a very long quote, and I'm not going to repeat it because I can't remember it word for word, but the essence of it is all of our pain is sent specifically for us. All
Mm.
of our problems, our woundedness is for us. It's our journey. And they will poke and poke and poke at us until we start to pay attention to them. And if we don't, they will take us out. And taking us out can look like illness,
Mm.
because I do a workshop called People Pleasing Can Make You Sick, and we have evidence on this now.
Mm.
Autoimmune diseases, cancers, things like that can actually make you sick
Mhm.
because you are not looking after yourself. You're
Yeah.
looking after everybody else, your children, your spouse, your family, and you're not looking after yourself. And this is particularly rife with women. I'm not saying men aren't people pleasers, because they are, but it's rife with women because of our conditioning and because we are like the linchpin of the family. But
Yeah.
that awful but wonderful metaphor on airplanes about the oxygen mask. Who puts it on first? If you're with a child or an incapacitated parent, a person, you put it on yourself first, because if you die, you can't look after anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's the message I really want to get out to women in particular, because that's why most women go into that people pleasing energy. It's because they've been raised to look after and nurture everybody else, and they don't look after themselves. And what they don't realize is when they're taken out, the rest of the people aren't going to do very well.
Yeah.
So we need to look after ourselves first. And for a people pleaser, that's like, that just sends chills down their spine. They don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
There are ways, and that is boundary work, and that's self work, that's inner child work and self work.
Yeah, I always think that, when you're constantly giving, you don't have any boundaries for yourself. So how can you possibly blame the other person? It's almost a case of, well, it's your fault for not having boundaries in the first place, and to make it, well, to put across that actually, no, I haven't got time. You can't just come and do X, Y, and Z. But
Yeah.
if you don't say that, you're just constantly letting other people in, and then you're getting burnt out, or whatever might be happening, right? So it is difficult because you can easily blame the other person and say, well, you keep taking advantage of me, but you're kind of letting them take advantage of you.
Absolutely. And as I said very briefly earlier in this conversation, is people pleasing is as manipulative as narcissism is. It's just it just looks different. It's packaged differently. We are both
Yeah.
wanting to be liked and to have something from people, but we're just going about it very differently. However, I just want to say this because I haven't said this yet. I take the word blame and fault out of all of my work because there's nothing wrong with using it in this context. But what I'm saying is, um, these are these are beautiful adaptations. Even narcissism is a beautiful personality adaptation developed by a very, very young child
Mm.
at a very young age to survive. They're protective mechanisms. Their
Yeah.
intention is not bad. It's how it shows up in life. So what happens is if we are not securely attached and raised in a securely attached family, we are then, and this is the really sad part for me, if we choose narcissism in this sense, is that child is imprinted with that for the rest of their lives. When the parents and everybody else are gone, that
Yeah.
child lives that every day as an adult and gets blamed for that personality type
Mm,
and gets vilified and shamed and all kinds of things when all they were doing was trying to survive.
yeah.
So I, having been married to a narcissist and having been raised by a narcissistic father, so that's where mine comes from. You see what, and this is important, I think, for me to highlight this in this moment, is if you were raised by a narcissistic parent, you were raised in very dysfunctional safety. So you
Mm,
normalize that behavior. It
yeah.
became familiar, which the word familial is in there. And you, in my case, I went out because it was my father. I went out into the world thinking that's what all men were like. They
Mm,
were rageful and angry and didactic and authoritative and all those things. So, of course, if I had a girlfriend that would look at me and go, I don't know how you're in that relationship. I don't know how you put up with that guy. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about?
yeah.
That's because to me, that was so like a great illustration would be so a child is, let's say, 7 years old and goes to a friend's house for the first time and has a sleepover, and they're raised by a narcissistic parent. And then they see these two parents sitting on the sofa holding hands and occasionally kissing each other on the cheek. And they're like, that's weird. They're weird, because it's so
Yeah.
unfamiliar to them.
Mm.
And so to answer your question, it really is something that you only see when it starts to poke you and it starts to become a problem in your life. And that's usually with people pleasing, that is usually burnout.
The whole blame thing, and I feel like now, when there's a lot of stuff that comes on about narcissistic behavior or narcissistic people, it's a huge blame thing now. And rather than thinking of, there is a reason why that person is like that, and it stems from their childhood experiences, and it's not their fault. It's just unfortunate when being like narcissistic, to up to a different scale, you're not going to recognize that, and therefore you're not going to get the help for being narcissistic. So it's almost like the cycle just continues. It just doesn't get broken, which is really unfortunate. And the only thing you can do, which is, I guess, what you did, is to, you got into a situation, and I guess maybe you were burnt out, or you experienced certain things, and there was a point in your life that, like you said, you get poked, and you thought, this needs to stop. I need to get help, and I need to come out of this situation. And therefore, you've broken your cycle.
Well, that's what my work is about.
Yeah.
I use the metaphor of a chain link necklace.
Yeah.
Okay. Each generation or each person is one of those links.
Mm.
And all of our trauma is generational and ancestral, right?
Yeah.
And that's why there's no
Absolutely.
blame.
Mm.
Because I'd like to think that we're all doing the best we can with the knowledge and the information we have in this moment as parents. I'm a parent, so I've made mistakes. I know.
Yeah.
The beauty is you can apologize, and you can. And it's quite a wonderful
Mm.
experience when you apologize to your children, what they say. But anyway, my goal in life is to break. So the person like myself, yourself, or whoever's listening to this, you have the opportunity to break the link and not pass that down, even
Mm.
if you don't have children, but not pass that down to your friends and family of that narcissistic behavior, because we have to begin to address these things. And I'm going to tell you right now, Shreya, there are people shouting at the screen going, oh, but narcissists are awful, and how I can't possibly think about it as being childhood trauma and stuff. Like, I get that. And
Mm.
this is what I want to say in that moment when people are shouting, because I was probably one of those people. And by the way, I didn't know I was in a narcissistic relationship. I didn't know I was raised by a narcissist. I didn't know my
Yeah.
brother was a narcissist. This is all stuff I learned when I was unraveling my trauma. And
Mm.
and I'm still learning. But the thing is, when you begin to have understanding, number one, understanding of the other person. So, using my father, I began to have understanding, not directly, because my father was deceased by then, but also he never talked about it. But I
Mm.
heard from other family members about his childhood. It was off the charts traumatic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
I won't go into it. It's very disturbing, but it was off the charts traumatic. So I was able to then have understanding, and then I developed compassion for his little boy, that little boy inside of him, that little child inside of all of us. Now, some people say, "Oh, you're talking about forgiveness." I never use the word forgiveness. Forgiveness is such a personal journey.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody is required to forgive. However, when you understand and have compassion from a distance, by the way, so I understand my ex-husband's traumatic childhood. I have compassion for his traumatic childhood from a distance.
Yeah.
But the forgiveness is a work in progress. But what
Mm.
happens when you have understanding and compassion, it sets you free. It really begins to set you free. And that's my goal. It's
Yeah.
one of my goals is to set you free. So the more understanding you have of the condition, the personality adaptation, the more you can maybe sit from afar. I'm not saying have these conversations with these people, but just go,
Mm.
I get where he's coming from or she's coming from. I really have compassion for that little child inside of them that is so stuck and so
Mm.
wounded. I'm not going to do anything about it. Maybe I'll pray for them or send them really good energy.
Yeah.
But that sets me free because then I stop blaming myself because that's what a lot of us do in narcissistic relationships. We go, I wasn't good enough. I could
Mm.
have done better if I had tried harder. And none of those are true.
Mm.
But that's the narrative that we're left with if we don't do the work.
My next question really is about narcissistic traits. Do you think everyone has a narcissistic trait? Because from what I understand now, there's a scale, right? You've got the, severe scale, and then you've got, like most things, and then there's a lower end scale. So do you think everyone fits somewhere in that scale?
Absolutely. So, what I failed to mention is in the first year of our lives, we are total narcissists, all of us. Think
Right.
about it. We can't do anything for ourselves. Everything is incoming. Change my nappy, feed me, turn me over, burp me. That's exactly the way it's meant to be. And in
Right.
the first 3 years of our lives, what we're doing is we're beginning to individuate and separate out from our parent figures. I'm
Mm.
not saying parents because we're sometimes raised by other people,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Um, but the narcissist doesn't separate and individuate. The real narcissistic personality style or narcissistic personality doesn't really begin to stand on their own 2 feet because they're either so angry and disillusioned by their needs not being met at the low end of that spectrum, or they've been mollycoddled, cotton wool, told they're amazing, handsome, beautiful all their lives. So their expectations, they're still attached to those expectations and to those beliefs. Okay. I wouldn't want to be either of them. And, because they're both really, really, it's very damaging.
Yeah.
Yes, we all go through life with narcissistic traits. Absolutely. You and I right now have narcissistic traits. It's really how the work we do with ourselves or for ourselves or with others for ourselves. It
Mm.
is self-awareness. So the thing that has been shut down with a real narcissist on that spectrum of narcissistic personality style or disorder is for me, the one I see is the highest is the lack of self-awareness.
Right.
Just haven't developed it and empathy. So they can look self-aware, they can come across as self-aware, they can come across as apologetic, they can come across as empathic, but it doesn't, it's not sustainable. So it goes back to the apology. I'm sorry for what I said to you, but you have no idea what my life is like at the moment. Or, you know, um, a narcissist goes to dinner with somebody, comes home and sits there and reflects for a moment on maybe a conflict or a row that happened. And they're like, so what was my part in that? It will always be blaming the other person. So the self-awareness is very short-lived. It never comes back to responsibility, their own responsibility. It's always, again, they don't know what I'm going through. They don't know how hard my life is. Now, this would be very much a covert narcissist, not said out loud. So that's a great example of they wouldn't go back to the person and say that. They would feel that inside. Poor me. No one understands me. I know a lot of us experience that, but I'm talking about the degree to which that's why it's so nuanced. I mean, where's the line? Where is
Yeah.
the line? But really, the two things that a narc really struggles to do is self-awareness. They'll have it for a moment and then it'll go back to, one of those people on that wheel is their fault. And the empathy is, oh, I really feel sorry. But it's not real. It's like, it's very fake. It's for society. And this is a terrifying fact. A lot of therapists are not trained in how to deal with a narcissist or even spot a narcissist. Okay. I mean, I now can pretty much spot them in my therapy. And they're usually a spouse, that comes with somebody. It's not usually the person, but, because a lot of narcissists don't actively seek therapy. They'll be brought in by somebody, for example. However, what they do is let's say they're in a relationship and their partner says, if you don't go to therapy, it's over. And they really need that person. Okay, money, whatever. So they go, okay, fine, I'll go to therapy. And what they do is they love bomb the therapist. And they do all the things to the therapist that they've done to their partner or doing to their partner. And the icing on the cake is they're so aware of the situation that they go there to learn. So what they do is they love bomb the therapist. The therapist then is like, oh, you're an amazing person. I feel, and then the narc gets the therapist in it unconsciously, unwittingly to teach them how to be a better narc by giving them ideas about how to present. Now, the therapist doesn't know this. Does this make sense how I'm explaining this?
Is this a bit like kind of reverse psychology or something?
So they'll say, my partner thinks that I'm not very emotionally demonstrative or whatever. What can I do? And the therapist will go, well, maybe you could, I'm being very basic, you could hold their hand while they're walking down the street, or you could stroke their, and so it's like tick, tick, tick. So they will do it, but not genuinely. They will go and hold the hand of their partner walking down the street, but it's not genuine. It's to show that I am more emotionally demonstrative.
Mm.
The other thing is, I just did a reel on this on Instagram. Quite a few, well, enough, let's put it that way, therapists are narcs themselves.
Right. Oh, God.
Because it's very attractive. You've got a lot of power. You tell people what to do. This is not how I work. But if you're doing the classic guru, like I am the sage, I am the guru, I have all the answers, you have all this power. And the stories I've heard, Shreya, from my clients about some previous therapists would make your hair fall out. Seriously.
Wow. Wow. I guess, how would you know then, when I'll give an example, like you're looking on social media, like say on Instagram or something, and then you have people talking about, this is a narcissist and narcissists are this and narcissists are that, and, which there is, there are people doing that. Or it could be another topic, I'm an expert on, I don't know, what to eat and what not to eat. And you follow me because I know everything about what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating. And this food makes you sick and this food doesn't, as an example, it's really vague I'm giving right now. Do you think that's what narcissism is driving them to do that, basically? Is that what that is? Or is
social media is full of narcissistic behavior. It's the perfect platform. How do I look? What am I saying? more importantly, how many likes did I get? How many follows did I get? It feeds narcissism.
Right.
And a really great example, you've reminded me, a great example of communal narcissism shows up on Instagram. You'll have, let's say you'll have a person that is like really beautiful and amazing, and their clothes are perfectly whatever, and
Yeah.
they're in a dog rescue place going, oh, I love dogs, rescue this dog, but they look immaculate, the lighting is perfect and all of that.
Yeah.
So that is a form of communal narcissism.
Mm.
It's not about rescuing dogs. It's about I'm being seen to have empathy, and as well as empathy, I look amazing. And I'm getting many more likes and many more followers from that. Now, on my Instagram, yes, I do like to look a certain way. That's the way I always look, by the way. I don't go out of the house not looking like that. It's not something I do just for Instagram. And I like to have good lighting and good sound because I think that's more professional. But my goal is to use my own experiences to help others not make the same mistake that I made, and just to create awareness. So the answer to your question is, it's twofold. Time, you need time to spot a narcissist. It is not like that. I mean, okay, there's some very rarely situations that I can walk into a social situation and it happened recently. I felt the energy of this person because I'm an HSP. It's a temperament trait I was born with, a highly sensitive person. So I have this visceral response to people. And I can feel narcissism now because of my background and my experience and my training and my own personal experiences. However, it does take time. And the best thing you can do, and I'll use myself as an example, my hole that I would fall into all the time was flattery. If somebody flattered me, I'd be like, oh, because I was a people pleaser and I needed the incoming, right?
Yeah.
So now what I do is I have space between stimuli and response. Okay. So the stimuli would be, oh, well, you don't know, whatever. And I, instead of just going in and saying, oh, thank you, almost like, oh, we're going to be friends or whatever, I step back. I take a step further back and I observe. There isn't an easy solution to this. There isn't a perfect equation to this. It is time and space.
Yeah.
And if you get a feeling about somebody quite quickly, get out. And what I say to my clients and followers and everything, I don't like labels, actually. I know I talk about narcissism and it's a label. It's just an easier handle to use.
Mm.
But if you feel like you're in a toxic relationship, it doesn't matter what we call it. Get out. Get out. I've got I had the privilege, and I think it is a privilege. I had the privilege to do a YouTube interview with Dr. Sam Vaknin. I don't know if anybody, maybe some of your listeners will know him. And he is a twice diagnosed NPD, okay? Not by choice. It's to do with something that he doesn't talk about very often. And I didn't probe. So he's a narcissist. I'm speaking to a narcissist. And he said at the very end of the conversation, he said, whether it's money, property, children, whatever, he says, whatever you have to sacrifice, please get out of that relationship. It will eat your soul. It will suck the soul out of you. Now that's coming from a narcissist. And he has quite a good video on YouTube I watched. It's a very small, short video, and he's standing in front of a group of people as a lecturer, all, like this. And he says, he looks at them and he says, so some of you looking at me now, and you probably think, and this is a classic narcissist thing to say, he says, you probably think I'm tall and handsome and very smart. He said, but guess what? There's nothing here. Behind this, there's nothing. I don't care about any of you. I don't like any of you. I have no feelings about any of you. And I love when people share the experience of being a narcissist, because we don't get it.
Yeah.
My metaphor is, imagine, I just make this up, but imagine a narcissist has a red brain and you have a blue brain. You'll never understand that red brain, and neither do you want to.
Yeah.
But pay attention to how they're presenting, what they're saying. Maya Angelou, one of my favorite people, said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time.
Yeah.
If you don't get a good feeling about somebody, honor it. Don't be a people pleaser and go, well, I'm just going to keep going. Maybe I can get to them. Maybe I can change them. Maybe I can soften them.
Yeah.
No, that's not your job. We can't change anybody.
Yeah.
Else.
That's the key thing, and something I have learned. So, in childhood, when I was a bit younger, I always thought, no, I can change the way they're thinking, or I can change, how they're behaving. And I've realized now, you know what, it's not my job to change you. It's not my job to do that. My job is to actually stay away from you.
Thank you.
That is my job. My job is to have boundaries, stay away from you, or still way away from, however, depending on the relationship, whether you keep that person at arm's length or you just completely cut them off, it depends, right? But that is my job. It's not to change you. If you can't see what you're doing, that is not my problem. I can maybe tell you once, and if you don't listen, then that's that, really.
Yes, it is your choice. It is always your choice. And that's what, again, people-pleasing personalities don't get that they have a choice. They really don't. They think that it's something that they have to go through. You'll probably understand how many times I hear people say to me, but I just don't understand how they could do that. You never will. And that's a good thing. Because you don't think like that. You have empathy. You have self-awareness. You're not delusional to the extent of that. But some people are like, I just want to understand how they can think like that. No, if you want to understand something, understand that there's a very wounded child inside of them. You can't fix them. In relationship, you should never be anybody's mother or father and never be their therapist. It skews the relationship. It turns it into something really strange, like incest almost,
Yeah.
You're in an intimate relationship with somebody and you're being their mother or you're being their therapist. Neither of those are meant to have any sexual overtones in our society, thankfully. But people do it all the time. I'm going to fix him. And it's the worst in a narcissistic relationship because the people pleaser, let's say codependent person, the target, I'll use target, has seen this amazing person at the start and they're living for the return of that person. But what they don't realize is that person never existed. They made themselves up to reel you in. But what you're now seeing is the real version of them, but you're living for the idealized version of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're not there. And we can spend years and years. I did it. I didn't divorce my husband the first time I found out he had a child with somebody else. I thought, well, he's with me and he's not left me and all that stuff. I had two little kids, I was breastfeeding one of them. So there wasn't a lot of wiggle room for me. Yeah. And we know that women are, unfortunately, sometimes financially bound to marriages and things like that. So as I told my daughter, the best advice I can ever give to a woman is make your own money. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Always make your own money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is a really, really important thing. You don't know. No one goes into a relationship thinking, yeah, this is going to end. Whether that ends through divorce or being a widow, whatever that is.
Illness.
It could be anything. But yeah, absolutely. You need to make sure you have enough wealth to survive.
Financial security.
Yeah.
You might not have any other security, but at least you have financial security, which gives you the opportunity to survive.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful quote that I have at the end of my my emails. It's by Viktor Frankl, who I'm sure you're aware of, and some of your clients are. And he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. And in our response is our growth and freedom. And I just think that is, I couldn't have said it better for being in a narcissistic relationship. Because, as I said, my stimuli was flattery. And my response was always to lean into flattery. But now I lean back from flattery. And I go, let me think about this for a moment. So between stimuli and response now for me, and this is the way to healing, this is one of the ways to healing, is to lean back from it and to be with self and go, okay, this has activated me. And activation can be a very good thing. It can feel really good. It doesn't always have to feel negative. It's like, oh, this feels good. And it's like, how come this feels so good? And why am I so willing to just lean into this person because they've said something nice to me? Well, that's probably because you didn't have it.
Yeah.
You need it. It's one of your basic needs. So you don't just lean back, you lean back and create a space. And in that space, you have a choice. And that choice may be to lean back in with more knowledge and information, or to stay away because you're going to choose something else. And that's really what it comes down to. And this man was in concentration camp and almost died. And, you know, his positivity and his ability to see that there is a choice, even when you don't have a choice, or it appears you don't have a choice. There's always a choice every day of your life. There's a choice of how you get up and what you do with that day. And whether you lean in or you lean back. And if it doesn't feel good, don't lean in.
Yeah.
Really don't lean in.
I do really love that quote. I did read that from your emails. It's in your signature. And when I read that, I've never actually read that before. And I read that and I thought it was almost like a light bulb moment that went off in my head. And I thought,
Big too.
yeah, I thought, oh yeah, of course, that's right. You know, it is a beautiful quote, and it definitely made me think for sure. So I want to kind of have a final kind of point to make in terms of a narcissist, right? You know, we know there's a scale, and everyone has some kind of narcissistic trait.
Yeah. We need them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So we need
So, we need a bit of ego. We need a bit of, looking after ourselves.
exactly. So, at a point of when you're in a relationship, whether that's, marriage or, a friendship relationship, or it could be colleagues, whatever, we're faced with all sorts of people everywhere. At what point can you look back and think, this is dangerous, or this can be dangerous? This person is narcissistic to the point where it's dangerous for me to be around. How can you even identify that?
Well, it's really difficult in our current society because we have so many distractions and we have so much pressure, self-inflicted and inflicted by society, to do better, be better, to make more money, to get better jobs. We're always going that way forward. We're not really pausing. And the most magical word in the vocabulary, in my opinion, is to pause. It's pause. And people are like, well, it's not a big deal, but it is. And it's in Viktor Frankl's quote as well. And I felt this before I even found that quote. It's that ability to pause and to sit quietly with self and to be able to reflect. So let's say, or do you have an example? I don't know. Do you have an example of a time in your life where you might have felt a certain way? If not, I can suggest something. Maybe you didn't feel right. You don't have to name names or anything, but was there a relationship where you felt, this feels a bit off?
I don't know, actually. Probably. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say no, never. I'm sure there are lots of points.
So we'll
I mean, I've been in like meetings or events where I've been like, actually, this feels a bit odd,
Yeah.
this doesn't, that kind of thing, or come across people, I just get this feeling where I'm thinking, I don't know about that person. I don't, there's something not right, I do get those sometimes, definitely.
Okay, so that's a short-lived one. There are longer-lived ones where, you have to be with that person because you're maybe a colleague at work or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, both apply to what I'm about to say. That's when you want to stop. You literally want to take 5 minutes, or at least a minute for yourself. And what I always recommend people to do, because my work is somatic, so it's mind body connected. We cannot divorce the mind from the body because they are what we think we feel, just very simply vagus nerve, all that. So it's about really pausing and closing your eyes and just allowing, if you can, scan your body from top of your head to the tip of your toes and say, where am I feeling this? And for most of us, it's usually in the trunk of our bodies. We might feel it in our throat. Some people feel it in their head, but we usually feel that or solar plexus or heart or gut. Those are quite typical places we feel something. And you take your hand and you put your hand on that space and you hold a space for it, literally. You create some safety. And it may sound a bit crazy to people, but it works. You start talking to it. And usually it's a very young part of you. And that's what I say to my clients. How old is that part? And they'll go, 5, 3, 4 years old. Sometimes it's in utero, but that's a different thing. And you just hold that space and if you can get a visual, not everybody can do this, if you can get some sensory attachment to, or a connection, I meant, to that part of you. So for me, I'm very visual. I might see myself as a 5-year-old and I'm scared and I don't know why I'm scared, but I just sit with it. And I might say to it, what do you need right now? Or is there something you want to say to me? And these parts will speak to us. These parts will communicate if we create safety for it, because it's very exciting work because they haven't been seen sometimes for decades. And they're almost like, oh, somebody's realized I'm still here. Because what happens is parts of us get stuck and frozen in time. Because, fight, flight, freeze, they're trauma responses. So as kids, we couldn't fight, we couldn't leave. So we froze. And those are frozen parts in us. So you might want to sit with that part and you might get something like, I'm really scared, or I'm afraid of that person. I don't know why I'm afraid of that person, but I'm afraid of that energy. And then it might remind you of something. And that's usually, you go back to core. Where did this start? When's the first time I felt like that? And you just create some safety for that part. And you say, I see you. I hear you. I accept you just the way you are. What do you need right now? And it might say, don't go back in the room with that person. Or when you have to go back in the room with that person, get yourself in a really good state. Do some breathing, some breath work before you go in. Do some visualization before you go in. Protect yourself. But what we do is we fling ourselves about in this world and we get a bad feeling about somebody. And we're like, oh, well, when I leave, I'll just go do something nice. No, it's good, but it's a distraction. Was that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to make a statement right now, and you just correct me if I'm right or wrong in thinking this.
I'm sure I won't.
Are people that have experienced childhood trauma, and okay, let's talk about serious childhood trauma. And I know again that is another scale, right? Serious to how the severity can be on a very long scale as well. But people that experience childhood trauma, are they more likely to be narcissistics on the more severe scale? Is that right?
Well, yeah, but it's a nuanced answer to your question. First of all, trauma is not to be compared, and we do this all the time. So there's big T traumas and small T traumas, which some people may know. Big T traumas would be the really obvious ones, like unfortunately the earthquake in Myanmar. That's it's big T trauma. Car accidents, things like that. They're events, very traumatic events. Okay, sexual abuse. The small t traumas are only really getting a lot of traction in the past 30 years based on the ACE quiz, Adverse Childhood Experiences, as I mentioned earlier. It's not really diagnostic, it's just giving us some idea of what a person has experienced. And schools are now embracing it a bit more as a baseline assessment of what a child is coming into school with. So there are 10 yes or no questions. I send it out to all my clients before I work with them. And it'll be things like before your 18th birthday, they all start the same. Did you experience? And that could be, was there addiction in your family? Did you have your needs met? Like, did you have clothing, food, things like that? Another question is, did anyone in your family go to prison? So these are all like kind of indirect, simmering, small t traumas. But as Gabor Maté says, and I will stand by this, I totally believe this, trauma is not what happens to us. It's what happens inside of us as a result of what happened to us.
Right.
Okay? So no two children in the same family have had the same experience because of their personality adaptation. So to make that really clear, like take two people standing at an intersection, strangers, and they experience the same rather horrific car accident. Now, one of those people will go home and maybe go home to their husband or partner and say, oh, I saw this horrific car accident today and bloody, 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 blah. And he may say, let me get you a cup of tea or whatever. And then they have dinner and they carry on with the rest of their evening. And she gets up the next day, he gets up the next day, and it's kind of forgotten.
Yeah.
Other person standing next to them, seeing exactly the same accident, is absolutely traumatized for the rest of the day and sometimes beyond. They can't forget about it. It becomes something else. They might even get to the point where they can no longer get in a car. Now I'm fast forwarding that down the line. Okay. So we cannot legislate or quantify how trauma lands with us. That's the first thing, first part of that answer. Trauma leads to personality adaptations, and narcissism is one of those, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And two really significant ones, and this is not to offend anybody listening, but we now have the research on this, is to do with attachment style very young, when the child was raised by nannies, is one possibility, and sent off to boarding school. Because the parent looks at, let's use boarding school, and I'm not here to offend anybody because, we all make decisions based on, but it's just research we have now. So the parent looks at the child's future and goes, I'm going to send my child to boarding school. He or she's going to get the best education. They're going to make friends for life, yada, 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 yada. And it's going to be great. They're going to learn independence, but they're 7 years old. The child raised by nannies, same thing. I travel, my work is this and that. I'm not judging anybody. However, all that child knows is, because our brain isn't fully formed till we're about 25 years old to process stuff, and 7 is quite young. All that child knows is mommy and daddy are leaving me at the school gate and leaving. They're abandoning me. The same with the nanny. I want mommy and daddy, but I can't, they're not here. And I've had clients that have experienced both of these, and there's a lot of research on this. So the child doesn't process the boarding school, the nanny, or whatever choices you make as you see it. They process it as remember the two biggest fears, rejection and abandonment. That's all they feel. It's the same with sleep training a child. Letting a child cry, the child doesn't know, oh, my parents are teaching me how to sleep through the night. No, all they know is I'm crying and nobody comes. And I'm crying and I'm crying and I'm crying. And then the parents go, oh, good, Johnny's fallen asleep. He's learned how to fall asleep on his own. No, he hasn't. In fact, if anything, there's an incredible amount of trauma just laid down for that child because they can't process that. So it's really hard to answer your question. Is there a direct link to the level? I think that's what you're saying, the level of narcissism.
Yeah.
The level of any personality adaptation will be higher and more extreme with the level of trauma. Absolutely. So that will go for narcissism as well, and people pleasing, and
Yeah.
all the others.
Thank you so much for being my guest. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and I'm so glad that you were able to kind of demystify a lot of the stuff that's out there as well, and I've fallen for a lot of the stuff as well, narcissism, oh, they're narcissist, or it's just not black and white,
Not bad people.
yeah, exactly. And I never saw it like that until I met you. And that's why I really wanted you as a guest on my podcast, just to kind of talk about these things, because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation, or just information, black and white information, put it that way. So, thank you again. And it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. May I just share with your listeners that I'm on Instagram as Michele Paradise Official,
Yes,
but my name is spelled with one L, so it's Michele Paradise Official. And I think all your listeners are going to get a discount on my new Narcissistic Abuse Workbook,
yes,
which we'll put in the notes.
yes,
So
absolutely.
I hope some of you sign up for that, because if you feel that you're in a narcissistic relationship or may have been in one, it will help all of those things. It creates
Yeah.
awareness and healing.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting for a lot of people to delve into that, because, sometimes you just don't know. And, you don't know what you don't know. And when you do certain things like this, it kind of, you know, you can connect the dots, put it that way. And then there's that moment where you think, that's why.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you right now, which maybe not what your listeners want to hear, but some of you listening are in narcissistic relationships.
Yeah,
You don't know it.
exactly.
And that
Exactly.
could be a parent, that could be a sibling, that could be a friend, that could be a romantic partner.
Yeah.
But if you think that 1 in 5 to 6 people, you have 100 people in the room, so
Yeah,
and I
it is.
literally have people, not even clients, but just people I meet, and they know what I do, and they say, I don't know a narcissist. And I'm like, I don't burst their bubble.
Yeah.
But when, like, I'm doing a workshop, let's say, and they'll say that at the beginning of the workshop, by the end of it, they're like, you know what? I think, that friend of mine or that girl I went to school with, or that guy, or my boss, or whatever, I think they fit the description that you've been talking about. So I just want to get people thinking. I don't want people pointing the finger at other people and going, you're a narcissist, you're a terrible person. I'm not
No.
saying welcome them into your life. No. Remember what I said, understanding and compassion. Just do the understanding bit from afar. Keep
Yeah.
keep them far away from you.
Yeah.
Protect your energy field. All right. And I've done that now, and my life has changed, just to say. And I'm now in a beautiful relationship with a very kind and loving man. And that took my work,
Yeah.
not his work.
Yeah.
It was, there are good, there are people out there that are right for you. But as long as you run this unhelpful personality adaptation that worked great as a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, doesn't work as an adult. That's the difference. They're
Yeah.
great adaptations when we're children, but then we grow up, we look like an adult, we buy houses, have children, get jobs, and that's when it begins to get in our way. And we're like, why is my life going so wrong? Or why can I never meet this? I said to my therapist, I keep meeting the same guy. He has a different face, a different name, but he's the same guy. And she said, you're the common denominator. And that's when I knew I had to do the work. So we have to stop blaming other people. We can blame them for a nanosecond and then come back to self and say, what am I doing? What healing do I need? I always have the Matryoshka dolls on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
No, and oh, they're working today, because sometimes they get stuck, which is also a metaphor in life, right? And the work that I do is with authentic self. This is the one. This is that solid little wooden one. And what we do is we just put layers and layers of personality adaptations on as we go through life. And we don't realize that we are no longer that authentic person, but he or she is still inside of you. That is an absolute given. You still have that joy. You still have that desire to, want to be part of life, to be the best version of yourself. But it's just been covered over by layers and layers of how we feel we need to show up for society. And my work is to get you back to that authentic self who's still there. And when you do, and it's a lifelong journey, by the way, it's not black and white, it's not a switch that goes on and off. But when you do get back there, you start attracting different kinds of people, you start manifesting different kinds of people, and different people see you that never saw you before. And that has been my experience. I can say that absolutely hand on heart, that has been my experience. If I look at my life now, I have lots of different people in my life that I never had before. And they're really solid, kind people because I've made some changes.
Yeah.
It's always back to self.
Yeah, absolutely. Michele, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on. I can't wait to do another episode with you.
Thank you very much.